Smart Freight Sennder was really founded upon kind of the 4 principles of how do you actually decarbonize supply chains. And one of the first steps is actually to calculate and report your emissions. Secondly, to set your targets in line with the science-based. Then take collaborative action. And finally, work together to make it happen. The first step was where the first step of calculating and reporting is the first thing that we actually started to work on in 2012 already when SFC was founded. At that time, there was a wide mixture of how to calculate and report greenhouse gas emissions, which meant that individual companies were calculating it differently. You couldn't compare apples to apples. Today, we have now the GLEC framework, and also in particularly, that was also an international standard now, 14083, recently this year launched, that actually sets the baseline agreements. This is how you calculate and report your emissions, and this is how you compare them against each other, which is a major step forward for the industry. With the transparency, you now can actually take collective action accordingly.
Amazing. So what you measure, you can manage, and you guys have essentially been able to roll that out globally, where all the world's largest organizations are using your accounting standards to calculate carbon emissions, and now it's an ISO, as you just mentioned, the 14083. And are there going to be any big changes for companies that are already aligned with the GLEC framework coming into the ISO rollout?
Yes and no, I would say. So as we actually releasing also now the new version of the GLEC framework, 3.0, what you'll see is that carbon accounting of logistics emissions has a few fundamental principles that have been adhered to. You take well-to-wheel emissions, so you take the whole life cycle of the fuel, and that's quite relevant because of the production, of course, is a major contributor of the emissions as well. You take a full round-trip perspective, so you're also responsible for your empty mileage that are being addressed there. Those principles haven't changed. What is changing here is kind of 2 things. One is we'll start to talk about how do you actually specify your logistics operations. And you need to be a bit more specific than to say, look, this was road freight. Now you need to say this was road freight in a particular area, so which we call transport operation categories. So that is a nuance that will be brought into through the ISO 14083. A second difference is now logistics sites also need to be included. So far, logistics sites or distribution centers and their emissions were excluded. And from today onwards, from the ISO onwards, you'll need to include those.
So is it safe to say that over time, beginning in 2012, when the Smart Freight Sennder was founded, through today, that our carbon calculations have gotten better and more accurate and more precise?
Absolutely. But the core still remains that we have agreed now on the methodology, so you can actually compare emissions to each other, so individual companies can make a selection and an argument. One of the critical elements still remains, which is also to obtain your correct data to make the calculations. What's making it easy today is you and I can make a back of the envelope calculation, fairly easy, of what the transport activity looks like from shipping a container from, say, Rotterdam to New Jersey. But if you want to actually understand then which partner is doing better, so which carrier is performing better than the others, you need to obtain also more granular data. And that's still, of course, in the hands of quite a few logistics actors to make that happen.